Hi, I'm mayaGkern. I work full-time as a comic artist, illustrator, and product designer, and this is how to make a webcomic you'll actually finish. I started making monsterpop in 2012 while I was attending the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. At the time, I planned to make this comic for 1 or 2 years in between schoolwork and the short story comics I was making. Now I've been making monsterpop for 6 years, and I still have nearly 2 or 3 years left before it'll be done. I've learned a lot over these 6 years, and I have a ton of knowledge that I wish I had going into monsterpop, and I'd like to share that with you all now. So, a bit more about me. I attended MCAD from 2009 to 2013, and I studied comic art. During that time, I made a number of short comics, including Fairy Fail, How to Be a Mermaid, and Redden. After college, I moved out to California, took a bunch of commissions and freelance work, made some silly comics about my life, and burned through pretty much all of my savings trying to find a steady job. I eventually found a steady gig working for Gaia Interactive, but through a combination of that and taking too much other freelance work, I overworked myself and my body, and ended up being unable to draw for over a month because of how badly I injured myself. This was one of the hardest times of my life, and it was unsustainable for many reasons. I was forcing myself to do more than I can handle. I wasn't taking care of myself, and I wasn't making enough money to take a break. But because my body gave out, I had to. This failure helped me learn what I could and couldn't do, and what is sustainable for me. Now I've been making monsterpop for nearly 6 years, and I work full-time with my wife making comics and illustrations and merchandise in a healthy, sustainable way. So, how do you make a webcomic you'll actually finish? To give yourself the best chance to carry your comic to completion, you need passion, sustainability, a schedule, strategies for tackling your big favorite idea, and financial stability. Make sure this idea is something you have passion for. How often do you think about it? Do you lay in bed plotting and scheming and world building? How sick are your friends of hearing you talk about it? It's fine if you want to make something popular, but comics are a lot of work, and if you do not love your idea, it will not be worth the time and energy you put into it. The time you spend on your comic is time you're not spending with friends or loved ones, or doing your job or other things that are important to you, so this comic should be important to you too. Comics are too much work not to love them. Passion is what gets you through all the hard work. If it's not enjoyable, it's not sustainable. What does make your comic sustainable? You've got a great idea that you love, but you can't pull through on passion alone. How well do you know your subject matter? For instance, if you are writing a magical girl comic set in the Wild West, you should probably learn about horses, guns, the law or lack thereof, saloon culture, the climate, and the vernacular. For example, if a horse has a red ribbon on its tail, that means it kicks. Now that you know that, it can add color and maybe a plot point to your story. And if someone shows up to your old western with an assault rifle, it will break suspension of disbelief because it will feel out of place, even though magic exists. And everyone knows that no good leaky mouth nibbler Sal's raising sand down at the old watering hole. He's gonna get kicked galley west before the hour's up. And if you do your research, you too can sound like you grew up with a mouthful of sand and a butt full of guns. The point is, doing your research will make you more comfortable with your subject matter and will make it easier to work with. It's not enough to just know about your subject matter. You have to be able to draw it too. Comics are by and large a visual medium, and you're going to have to be able to convey your ideas through drawing, so you should take your time to learn how to draw your characters, setting, the type of scenery and backgrounds you'll need, the props, and everything else in your world. Luckily, the better you know your subject, the more you understand it, and the easier it'll be to draw. As you can see, here's my very bad horse drawing on the left, and then some very good horse drawings by people who actually took the time to learn how to draw horses. Some important questions about your drawing style, because one of these drawings took 20 minutes and the other one took 8 hours. How time-consuming is your drawing style? How natural is it? How consistent is it? How expressive or emotive is it? How stylized is it? Can you simplify complicated things like crowd scenes or large backgrounds without sacrificing immersion? How well does it convey movement or action? Will your drawings be colored? How detailed and time-consuming will your tone/color be? Simple isn't bad. Remember, your goal as a comic artist isn't to draw the prettiest picture in the world. It is to communicate your story. Frequently, comic artists syndicated in newspapers will find ways to simplify and streamline their drawings to hit tight deadlines. Kathy by Kathy Guys White is just a classic. It's not pretty, it's not gorgeous. It communicates exactly what it needs to. It's not bad for it to not be pretty, because it accomplishes everything it needs to. Peanuts is simple and charming, but again, it's fast for a reason, and it communicates the ideas it needs to. A simple style is often used to communicate charm or humor, but it can also present a harsh minimalism or be used to convey an emotion behind a story or a character. Oftentimes, it can be useful to simplify parts of your drawings and provide detail in areas of greater interest. Many comics will leave areas blank. This is called negative space, both as a compositional tool to provide visual impact and a way to reduce drawing time. It's also common to see screen tones or visual elements like action lines, flowers, sparkles, and shapes to replace or aid backgrounds to save time, particularly in shoujo manga. In Japan, it's common for mangaka to have assistants, or for groups of artists called circles, like Clamp, to collaborate to create comics, and in mainstream Western comics, it is common for freelance artists to be hired on a contract basis as pencilers, inkers, colorists, or letterers, instead of creating entire comics alone. Still, some artists just want to put us all to shame. Some comics also have very slow release schedules. Speaking of your schedule, you have to make one. To make your schedule, you need to know how frequently you want to update, how many strips or pages you want to post per update, how long on average a single strip or page will take you to create, and how much time you can allocate per week to work on your comic. Unlike print comics, which typically update bi-weekly or monthly or on a per-book basis, webcomics usually update weekly or multiple times a week. This is very different from print media, both as a creator and a consumer. This slows the reading pace and means that instead of consuming a chapter or book as a whole, the reader gets tiny bite-sized chunks of story. This can make the pacing of webcomics seem really slow. As a creator, this means that how you work has to change. An artist working for print media can work like a one-man assembly line and complete all their sketches for a chapter before they even start inking, but most webcomic artists have to complete one batch of updates before moving on to the next, usually on a per-page basis. This can make the comic as a whole less consistent, since instead of working on a batch of 30 pages all at the same time, the artist is probably completing the pages one by one in order. I put anywhere from 2 to 6 hours of work into an average monsterpop strip. I usually update 3 strips per week, which means on any given week, I could be doing between 6 and 18 hours of work on this comic, and it roughly averages out to about 15 hours of work per week. To get an idea of how long your workflow takes you, you'll probably have to draw some test pages to try things out, but I'll talk more about that later. Comics take a long time. Do you know how long you want your comic to be? Because however long you think it is, you should probably at least double that. So, how do you schedule your comic? First, you want to break your writing down into manageable chunks. Start by listing your overarching goals for a given chapter or scene, including character development and story themes. Then create an outline with concrete events and emotional beats. Following your outline and keeping your goals in mind, write a script that further cements your ideas into a logical progression of events. Sketch or thumbnail your scenes, and then finish the art. Goal. After the return of her mom, Franny starts to act out of character, and it makes George and Percy worried about her. Chapter 6 should have George and Percy work together to help Franny and thus improve their relationship over time. Outline. During a class scene, Franny doesn't show up. George and Percy are shocked and worried. George covers for Franny and then texts her and doesn't get an answer, so she and Percy decide to go look for her. Script. Class scene. George and Percy are signing in for attendance. George, have you seen Franny? She's late. Percy shakes head. George fakes Franny's signature. George, texting Franny. Hey, I signed you in. Are you almost here? Class passes and Franny doesn't show up. George, texting. Hey, what's up? Are you okay? Why did you miss class? George and Percy share uneasy looks. George. Hey, so... Percy. Do you know why Franny missed class? She hasn't texted me back. George. No, she hasn't texted me back either, but I'm sure she's... Actually, you know what? This is weird. I'm gonna see if I can find her. Do you want to join? Percy nods. Each stage of my process works to resolve a problem set up by the stage before it. My goal shows the heart of a given scene or chapter. It's the meat and potatoes of the story. Each step beyond that provides context and clarification. Once I hit my sketch stage, I put dialogue from my script into my canvas and feel out the rhythm of the strip. Because I've been making Monster Pop for so long, I don't need to thumbnail it, and I can feel where a good place to end a strip is. But if you're uncertain, I'd recommend thumbnailing your page compositions before moving to sketches. But for me, fitting the right amount of dialogue for the emotion of the scene is the most important part of my sketch process. I use 3D models in Google SketchUp, which is free, to set the stage for the scene. Also, I typically end up adding a lot of little touches to my sketches that aren't in my script. Things like the teacher's dialogue in the background here, or how George and Percy's conversation moves them out of the classroom to keep the dialogue flowing, and sometimes I'll add visual gags or jokes that are inspired by how I've staged the scene. This adds flavor to the story and helps to flesh out the world. Finishing the art is the easiest and most time-consuming part of making comics. By this point, I've already made pretty much all my decisions, but making art takes time, and once you've set the parameters of how you're going to draw your story, there's not a lot you can do to alter how long it takes to make it. You love your story and you want to tell it, but you've got a problem. It's way too long and you have little to no experience making comics. Sound familiar? Well, don't worry, because I'm here to help you out with some hot tips, so here are my strategies for tackling your big favorite idea. Don't front-load your readers with too much exposition. When you have a big epic story that you love, it can be tempting to dump all the world building you've spent ages creating on your readers, but nobody actually enjoys that. Sure, there are some kids in the crowd who actually read the opening screen crawl of Star Wars movies, but do you enjoy it? Or are you waiting for the story to hurry up and happen? Don't try to squeeze a huge story into a small page count. When you try to squish your 300-page epic into 30 pages, you don't get a cool story. You get a recap episode. A recap episode for an anime you love is boring. A recap episode for a story you've never read is just pointless. When you're squeezing as much story into as little space as possible, there's no room to get to know your characters or your world, and no reason for the reader to get invested. Trying to tell your whole story in too little time is just a lot of look. Focus in on one aspect of your idea and refine it into something consumable, like how avant-garde fashion presents something strange and high concept, which then inspires ready-wear fashion, which trickles into department stores, and eventually into fast fashion and bargain retailers. You don't necessarily want to be the resale store at the end of the cycle, but you do want to make something consumable, and everyone who's watched The Devil Wears Prada already knows about this process. Instead, why don't you try honing your focus? Try writing a one-shot in the world you've built. Maybe a one-shot about the main character in a situation with smaller stakes, or a vignette about a minor character. This way you can practice writing and drawing things for your story, but you don't have to commit to a huge epic. It's also a great way to make some test pages and figure out your process and how long it'll take you to draw a page. And finally, it's time to talk about the big scary elephant in the room. Money. You're going to be putting in a lot of time and hard work into your comic, but you also have to be able to make a living. How much can you monetize your comic? How can you monetize it? How do you design comic elements with monetization in mind? And at what point does your comic become financially sustainable? Advertising is probably the easiest and least effective way to monetize your content. As the internet has evolved, views and clicks have become less and less valuable, and more people use ad blockers. And can you blame them? You probably use one too. In most cases, even popular webcomics can usually, at best, only pay their server fees with the money they make off advertising. Tapas may be an exception to this, as they have launched an experimental pay-to-read model where readers can pay a small amount of Tapas currency or watch an ad or two in order to gain access to comic updates. I've heard that some creators have achieved great success with this, but I haven't tried myself, so I can't say. Because I am not part of this pay-to-read model, and because my comic is not exclusive to Tapas, the amount of money I make off of advertising is basically nothing. I even removed ads from my personal site because they were so inconsequential. Even YouTube celebrities, who are the poster children for ad revenue, have been diversifying in order to not have to rely on ad money because of how unstable it is. If you have seen one of your favorite YouTubers launching a merchandise line, it's because ads just aren't reliable enough. Crowdfunding. Everyone and their dog has seen at least one crowdfunding campaign for a webcomic. You may be interested in utilizing a subscription model like Patreon, which allows content creators to charge monthly for exclusive access to extra content and can provide financial support in a more long-term sustainable manner. Or you may be thinking about using Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or a similar platform in order to crowdfund for a large project, such as a print run for your webcomic. Many artists, including myself, use both. A subscription model can help directly pay you a wage for all the hard work you put into your comic, and you can even set milestone goals when the monthly pledges hit certain amounts, like being able to create more comic pages per month once your Patreon pays your rent. When you run a Patreon, it is unlikely that supporters will find you on the Patreon site. Your patrons will have to come entirely from your own fan base, and many of them will be your diehard fans. A Kickstarter or similar crowdfunding campaign is great for funding a specific project. It won't pay you a monthly wage, and it will take a lot of work to figure out how much money you need to raise in order to pay for this cool thing you want to make. But Kickstarter has discover pages and lots of users who peruse the platform in order to find cool new projects to support, so it's a great way to fund a print run for your book and gain new readers. Merchandising is the cool new kid on the block, bringing in all the hot dollars. It's how I make most of my money, and how many other content creators do too. Obviously, the first thing to merchandise in a comic is the comic itself, but not everyone wants to buy a print copy of your free online comic, so it's good to have a few options. When I first created monsterpop in 2012, I wasn't expecting to be making it for very long, and I definitely wasn't planning to merchandise it. And thus I have found myself 6 years deep into a difficult to monetize comic. Sad. Now that I am older and wiser, I wish I had created a simple, recognizable logo or icon that I could slap on some sweet, sweet merch. The best monetizable iconography is simple, recognizable, wearable, versatile, and easy to print. Keep your design to 2 to 3 colors and make it something that can go on a sticker or a shirt. Make sure it's referential to the comic as a whole, but is something you'd want to be seen wearing in public. A smart designer will even plant the design in the comic itself. A school shirt, the sign design for the cafe the story takes place in, or a symbol that represents the alien army your main character is enlisted in, or whatever. If I'd been smart, I would have designed a unique and wearable school shirt for the college my characters attend, and I would have had them wear it more often. So, at what point does your comic become financially stable? I hate to break it to you, but there is not a lot of money in comics, and it's very difficult to make a living solely on comics. A small percentage of comic artists can make a living wage making comics for hire for publishers like Marvel, First Second, Dark Horse, or Boom, or by monetizing their webcomic, but it is a long, hard slug. More likely than not, you will have to make your comic while working some other job. Whether it's a 9-to-5 office job, working part or full-time in the service industry, or taking freelance illustration gigs to pay rent. There is no shame in needing a day job. Many of your favorite comic artists have or have had a day job while pursuing an art career. I personally make most of my money making art that I can sell on multiple products in my online store, and only a relatively small part of my income comes from my comic. I would love for my comic to make enough money to be my full-time job, but because that's not the case, I allocate the amount of time and work I can do per week on my comic based on what I can afford to take away from the work that makes me money. Having a long-term fan base for my comic helps me sell my products, and I do make around $1,000 a month on Patreon, but it doesn't pay all my wife's and my bills, and the money I make from Kickstarter gets funneled directly into funding more business expenses like manufacturing costs, and it doesn't actually end up in my pocket. So, too long, didn't read. 1. Make sure you are passionate about this. 2. Make your work sustainable. 3. Make a schedule. 4. Tackle your project intelligently. And 5. Have a plan for financial success.